Hello, everyone. My name is Julie Payette. I am the Governor General of Canada. Today is the 26th of November, 2020. And we are getting bad news again about the pandemic. Numbers are increasing. The level of infection is skyrocketing. To everyone who are listening, either on YouTube or Facebook Live, please do take care of yourself. Be very vigilant. This is exactly the time when we need to keep our guards up, that we need to really follow the public health officials' directives and to be patient. I know it is not fun anymore because we've been at this for several months, but this is more important than ever. We are getting some treatments and vaccines on the way, and it will get better. But right now, we need to continue to be fighting it. All the best to you all. Thank you for tuning in to this special GG conversation. Today we have an amazing person, Dr. Barbara Sherwood-Lawler. She is an earth scientist from the University of Toronto. I have to disclose completely that I have known Barbara for many, many years. We started serving on the Natural Science and Engineering Research Council, NSERC Council, many, many years ago together. And actually, and I must disclose that we were both very pregnant. Barbara with her second son, me with my first, at the time when we started serving on the council. We have struck a friendship because we are both completely passionate about science, but also about the bridge between science and art, because we believe that it's not just the scientific training, it's the curiosity, the creativity that is the drive behind discovery and invention. So, and I would say creating beautiful things. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you, award winner, Gerhard Herzberg, Gold Medal of Science winner in 2018, companion of the Order of Canada, Dr. Sherwood-Lawler. Hello, Dr. Lawler.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It's really wonderful to join you today for this conversation. I've enjoyed so many of them, watching them through the last few months of the pandemic, and looking forward to a chat today.
Thank you. And now that we've gone through the formalities, I think we're going to go back to Barbara and Julie because that's how we know each other. For those of you listening live, again, I have my red phone. If you have a question for Dr. Sherwood-Lawler, please do so. Talk to us, comments, everything is welcome. Barbara, I'm going to start with this fascinating story. One day, Barbara comes into my office and she's holding this vial. It's water with some residue at the end, and it says on it, Kidd Creek. It's a mine north of Sudbury, correct?
North of Timmins.
Timmins, sorry, not at Timmins, sorry, but in the same vicinity.
Yeah,
North of Timmins, Kidd Creek mine. And she says, this water we found in the rocks at the bottom of the mine, and I've just been told its age. I thought it was really old. Like 200 million years, 300 million years, which would have been the oldest water ever found on Earth. But it turned out that this water that I'm holding right now is 1 billion years old. So let me ask Barbara to tell us the story of how this came about that I'm holding 1 billion year old water.
Yeah, I mean, I think the basic thing is the Earth continues to be full of surprises. For the students out there who think, oh, we've already explored everything on our planet, we still haven't scratched the surface in some areas. So yeah, we've been working for 30 years in great partnership with mines all over the world, and had been working in South Africa, where we had found fluids and waters, salty waters, 1, 2, and 3 kilometers deep that were on the order of tens to maybe 100 million years.
Which was old at the time, right? I was the oldest, correct?
We were really excited about that. And we had some inklings that there might be older yet. But I remembered Kidd Creek. It's a very special place on the Canadian Shield. The rocks are 2.7 billion years old. And remember, our planet is 4.5 billion. So these are some of the oldest rocks that are still around. And so we thought, well, we'll bring the team with us there. We'll go to this special place and we'll see just how old the waters are there. And maybe there too, we'll find something that's 200 million years, 300 million years, and we'll be very excited. But when we eventually got the results back. And that was a story in itself. This is when we saw that from not just one, but 4 different independent lines of evidence, all showing us that the residence times of these fluids was on average more than 1 billion years in age. That it shook us.
But now you told me that you didn't believe that because it just didn't make any sense. Yeah, it was too much outside the box. So you went back to the lab and you asked them to do it again.
Always. This is what we do in science, right? I mean, we get an unusual result, and the first thing you think is, okay, what could have gone wrong? This is a must. You have to. You want to test all the possibilities. So we went back, we got more samples, we added additional analyses, and I sent them off to a colleague of mine, Chris Ballantyne, a dear friend and colleague at Oxford. And we didn't tell him so much about the context. You know, it was a good test. We sent it off to him. We said, hey, and he's usually really fast, and it took a little while. So I called him up. I said, hey, what's up? And he said, oh, the mass spectrometer must be broken. There's no way these numbers could be right. So I said, well, show them to me, show them to me. And indeed, when we looked at them, we realized, in fact, they are. But it's just simply we hadn't realized that the age comes from something called the radiogenic noble gas content, which just means the accumulation of helium, neon, argon, and xenon that gets.
And these gas don't interact much with anything. That's why you can date them, right?
That's why we call them the noble gases, or the pure gases, or rare gases, because they accumulate. So as they're produced in the crust, they just accumulate. And by measuring how much is there, we can come up with this sense of age. And indeed, these things broke all the records. They're the most radiogenic that have ever been identified. And since that time, this has been confirmed at other places around the world. But when you're seeing it for the first time, you're very careful.
I know we discussed as well the fact that because you saw something that was different than you expected, this is actually one of the best things that can happen. I think you quoted Edison about him working on the electrical light. I'll let you quote him because it's very telling.
Well, we don't know how apocryphal this is because there are people, many people claim to have invented the light bulb. But the standard idea is that it's Edison. And what Edison always said is, I didn't learn one way to make a light bulb that worked. I learned 100 ways to make a light bulb that didn't work. And so what he was trying to emphasize is the importance of the journey. It's by examining all the things that are different before you get to an understanding of that which is what you're looking for.
And that is not completely different in life. When we think about it, because we think science is just, some people would say, well, science is not for me, but it is this journey of making maybe a little error or not having exactly the outcome we wanted, learning from an experience, and then deciding which way we're going to follow based on this baggage. So there is all the education, there all the upbringing, the environment, the culture, and then there's the experimentation of life. Well, science is exactly the same. The more mistake we make in trying to get something done, the less we do later, because we learn from those mistakes.
And if we get afraid of the mistakes, then we can't make progress because we become too afraid to try something different. And it's the trying of something different that I think is really, as you say, it's not just at the core of science. It is the core of who we are as human beings, as an explorer, as an artist. You know, the first musician that decided to write something totally different, to change the models.
Thank Lord there are some more.
Yeah. It's really, I think, at the core of who we are as human beings, this desire to explore, and by exploring, seemingly sometimes to lose our way, but it's in that journey that we actually learn.
But then at the same time, we don't like making mistakes. We don't like at all. We you know, like, but what we have maybe it's
comfortable with
our own and to celebrate that if, I try that, didn't work, everything is all, nobody's hurt, all is good, then this is a good thing. And I can learn from this. What is also, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we are, you know, and this is sometimes a bit of a problem, I think, when we teach the scientific method in the schools. You know, I see this when my kids come home. We learn, oh, yes, well, we go out, we get facts, we make observations, we formulate hypotheses. And then we sort of take these little bricks of knowledge and we go to the edifice, we go to the wall of science that we think we know, and we try to see where our brick is going to fit in. It's kind of the way we teach the scientific method. And that is part of it, that journey. But I think sometimes when we're teaching what we do, particularly to children, we want to give them a sense of confidence in us as scientists and engineers. Boom, boom, boom. So we portray it as almost this very rigid exercise of observation, hypothesis, and test. And we don't emphasize, as much as we probably should, the creativity and the imagination. Because some of these little facts are obvious. But what I'm trying to emphasize today, and what we've talked about before, are what you might call the mistakes, the non-obvious ones, the pieces of the puzzle that don't
the facts that don't fit, what's happening.
Fit. You and I both love jigsaw puzzles, and we know you can't take those parts that don't fit and forget about them, and you can't
or try to ram it into the puzzle when it's not supposed to go there.
You have to sit back. And you have to take another look at what you think you know. And by taking those supposedly anomalous pieces, look back at the overall picture. And that's when you realize maybe the picture needs adjusting. Maybe there's something we need to do differently. Ursula Franklin, our colleague, always used to say, ask a different question.
Not the same question, ask it differently. See if that gets you anywhere.
Yeah.
It's something that, again, we ought to have almost in everything, when something doesn't quite work at home or in our cars, it's always a good thing to ask a question. And if you're not so sure, ask a second and a third.
Oh, heavens. And don't try to force it.
No, certainly not the puzzle.
Sit in the lab all the time.
Tried it. Let's get back to the billion-year-old water. So I was showing here the sample you gave me from the Kidd Creek mine. But then you went back and you extracted even more water. And then you gave me this one, maybe almost 2 years later.
Yeah.
This one, tell the story of the second time you went back to the mine.
That one was even deeper. It's right down at, the first one that you have there is from 2.4 kilometers. This one is from 3 kilometers. So it's even deeper in the system. It's a part of the system that's been less opened up. So it was an incredible opportunity. In fact, to go down there with our team, with our students, we actually go down and probably as deep or as close, they say, to the mantle as human beings can physically go.
When you were touching the wall, was the wall of the mine warm?
Yeah, it's warm.
At 3 kilometers.
Yeah, it's really, now South African mines are warmer because the geothermal gradient at the same depth is higher, but nonetheless, this is warm. When you're 3 kilometers below subgrade, it doesn't matter if it's minus 30 above, it's warm down below. And we had an opportunity there to take samples from just after they had been in and drilling into these fractures. So just after the water was released. And this allowed us to find just a couple of places where there was actually water that was older yet. This is the work of Ollie in my lab, Oliver Warr, who did some wonderful work and again, broke the records yet again, and showing us that what we have here is water that is average residence time based on the noble gases of 2 billion years.
2 billion years old water in this little vial. Yeah. And I think your colleague, Mr. Warr, Dr. Warr, said that if you drink it, it won't kill you, but it won't taste very good, correct?
Yeah, exactly. People think we were drinking this stuff, which you would never do. It's just when you're sampling it and it's flowing, it's flowing out, and little splashes get on you, the salt, they're very, very salty fluids. And so you inevitably, you know that these are salty and old, and you certainly know how they smell, and they don't smell good.
Now, Barbara, before I ask you why you are, why you were looking at old water and what was the purpose, I have to ask you, Kidd Creek is an operational mine.
Absolutely.
It's working.
Yeah.
What did the people there think when you showed up with your student and then you said, hey, I found a billion-year-old water? What was their reaction?
They are Amazing. I mean, they've been partnering with us and taking us down into that mine since the early 1990s. They've been immensely patient as we troop up there to take these samples here and take these samples there. But it's what's great about it is that the reason for this, and I think you've referred to this, is what we're doing is we're funded partly by the Canadian Space Agency, partly by NSERC, and partly by NASA with our teams from the United States, because these ancient parts of our planet are analogs. They're test beds for questions we want to ask about Mars.
They're similar to what happened on other planets.
We're so used to the Canadian Shield. We're used to those beautiful rocks across Ontario and Quebec. But what we don't know is how special they are. They're the oldest rocks on Earth. They're between 2.5 to more, a little bit more than 3, and in very few special places, 4 billion years old. All of Mars is billion-year-old rock. All of Mars is ancient. So these parts of Canada are some of our very, very best similarities in terms of geological terrain to Mars. And it's
now we have to explain, and I'm not a paleontologist, and I'm an avid reader, but that's the extent of my knowledge. But we have to explain that 2.7 billion years ago, which is about, the Earth was already almost 2 billion years ago, 2 billion years old, so was quite advanced in time. There was no continents. There was there was no life outside the water. The life outside the water, I think, appeared about 600 million years ago, if I'm correct.
Well, that's multicellular. Yeah. I mean, the key thing was, you're absolutely right. It was a planet that would have looked very different the way it looks now. You did have the core of what's become our continents, but it wouldn't look anything. We would not recognize the planet.
Correct. And it's way before the dinosaurs. Way before the dinosaurs, this water was formed, because the dinosaurs are 66, 65 million years old, which is really like yesterday in terms of geology. I have to say that Barbara is also a geologist. It's her first trade.
The life was there, but
it is on my phone, Barbara. Because I said before I ask you why, and when you've alluded to this, we got the question from Facebook from Sébastien Bertrand. He's asking you, in this old water, can we extract some information about early life or the early stages of the planet?
It's a very good question. But what's important to remember is that life arose more than 3.8 billion years ago. So even though these waters represent much earlier forms of life than we are now, life had been kicking around for quite some time. But it nonetheless does raise the question of, what can we find out about life from looking at these ancient waters? And that's really the whole reason why we do this. In Mars, we know it's a cold, dry desert now. If there was ever life on that planet, we will not find evidence of it on the surface now. It's too hostile. But if we can find fluids trapped below the surface of the planet, and if there might have been ever life on Mars, then any evidence of that life will be in those deep preserved fluids.
So if you find some water on Mars, like you did in the Precambrian rocks of the Canadian, should you be able to analyze that remotely?
These are some of the big questions that we're working on right now, right? Because how do you... It's not as impossible as it seems. There are actually places where subsurface processes come to the surface. There's places where you don't need necessarily to drill down, where things in the subsurface come to you. One of the most stunning examples of that is Enceladus, one of the moons of Saturn. And if you're people watching want to Google pictures of Enceladus, they'll see that the south pole of Enceladus actually has places where there are plumes of material shooting out into space from the bottom of the moon. And some of the theories about the nature of those plumes are again, analogs to what we look at on our planet. We want to understand subsurface water, subsurface salty water that's full of simple organic molecules and hydrogen, because those are the kinds of compounds that we're finding in these plumes coming out of Enceladus. On Mars, it's a bigger question. Exactly where might we find? Might we find springs? Might we find escarpments? Might we find lava tubes where there are places where these subsurface materials are coming to surface? It's a difficult question, but that's precisely where a lot of the planetary sciences and Mars community are spending their time right now, trying to think about exactly that question.
Well, what I take out of your answer, Barbara, is that we are not quite ready to do this remotely with robots and everything. So for those of you who would like to be the first humans working on Mars, well, the job is still open.
Yes.
We will need thinking, analyzing, questioning humans to go and do this kind of early work to figure out if indeed there has been life on Mars before. So that's a good thing. I have another question. And it's from somebody we know, Barbara. It's from Dr. Rinaldo Batista, Order of Canada recipient, and of course, a colleague of ours. He's asking you, what do the rocks tell us about the planet's many transformation in general? But more importantly, do these rocks tell us something about the future of our species?
Well, they do in a certain sense. I mean, what's fascinating, and I think the lesson that I tend to emphasize for neighbors and things is to understand that life on our planet has not always been as it is now. As life forms, we change our planet. It's happened before. These rocks are from a time at 2.7 billion years when there was no oxygen in the atmosphere. The oxygen that we have in the atmosphere now came from life. Microbes evolved that produced oxygen. Yep.
Can I ask a question then? You mentioned to me that the first vial you gave me, which has the 1 billion-year-old water, it has a little residue in there because there's oxygen, but that oxygen was not where you found the water. That oxygen came from today, from present day.
That's an artifact, yeah. But when these fluids were formed at 2.7 billion years, we had a non-oxygen atmosphere.
So where did they get the O2 of H2O?
From life. Microbes eventually produced enough oxygen that it tipped what we call the redox balance of the planet, and oxygen finally began to build up in the atmosphere. So, and the interesting thing about that is then life evolved to adapt to having oxygen. And those little microbes that were originally the winners on our planet, kings of the planet, became less important because they changed the nature of the atmosphere and therefore the climate. So that's an interesting lesson for us as living beings who see ourselves on the top of the system. We recognize that planets and life interact. Planets and life can interact in a way that's very positive, but they can also interact in a way that changes things such that the nature or the balance of life shifts. And so that's a very important thing to consider as we think about the changes that we're making to our atmosphere. Is it possible for life forms to change an atmosphere to a point that it's no longer as well adapted for them as it was before? Yes, it's absolutely possible. It happened at 2.5 billion years ago. We call this the Great Oxidation Event. And it is important to think about these changes when we talk about planets
Change, yes.
and stewardship that we as life forms have for our planet. It's not, the planet is not immutable. It has not always been as we see it today. It can change. It generally changes on very slow timescales, and so too does evolution. But what we're seeing in the course of climate change is this very rapid acceleration of changes to our atmosphere. And so we do need to ask ourselves, what will the impact of this be? We're already seeing the impact of it. We're seeing the impact on other species, on insects, on trees and plants, and we're seeing the impact on human beings.
So this research is not solely about old water and very, very old rocks. It is about who we are, what it affects, how it affects the climate. And yes, indeed, like Dr. Batista is saying, giving us an idea that things change. Nothing is immune and immutable and always the same, which gets me to another question, Barbara, because you work in planetary exploration, you're a member of several panels, you've worked many scientists with NASA and other space agencies. I was on a panel once remotely where Stephen Hawking was. He was talking to us from Britain. I was at the Perimeter Institute. And we were talking about why we needed to go to Mars, why it's important I was of the school that says that human beings will always explore what they don't know. They will always push the frontier of the known world. So if the frontier is 1 kilometer away, they'll push it eventually further away. If it's the outer space, then they will push it away. This is in our DNA to explore and to want to know further. But one of the things that Stephen Hawking had said was that he thought that we needed to go to Mars, the sooner the better, because we would sabotage our planet and we would need another place to live. What do you think about that?
I'm more of an optimist. I mean, the human ingenuity that would be required to actually move the human experiment and long-term history to another planet. If we could take that ingenuity and work on the problems we're facing right now, I think we could have a much happier future ahead of us. So my feeling is always, let's work on the home we have now, rather than necessarily looking to somewhere else to think that that will save us. We have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of human ingenuity, but we need to bring some of that to bear, learn the lessons. So for instance, learn the lessons that we've been living through the last few months and ask ourselves, this has been a terrible time, but one of the things we've seen is the ability of human beings to come together and to recognize certain things may be hard, but we need to do them for the common good. That's a lesson that could be extremely useful if we now think about, okay, we can, when push comes to shove, we can come together. So what are the other big challenges out there, like climate, that we need to do? We need to bring that same resilience, sense of solidarity to, and see what we can do as human beings.
Yeah, and sustainability of our large population, of equality, equal chances for everybody. We still have a lot of global issues to work with. And then, of course, I'm not even touching conflicts. Barbara, I know you have students, and you're someone that does presentations and speeches to young people. What do you say to young people? Not only about science, but about following passion and following your dreams?
Well, I think everything we've talked about in this last half hour really comes down to this. Never lose your sense of the possibilities. The world is always, as you put it, broader, wider, deeper, and the people around you have more to offer you than you realize. It just needs us to keep looking and to look with an open mind to what we can learn from each other and from the world around us. Never lose that sense of possibility.
So you were a young person. You grew up in Kingston.
Yeah.
And why did you decide to become a geologist? I'm certain that that was not something that many people did around you. What interested you in rocks?
Well, I was always picking up everything. I knew I was fascinated by the natural world. It took me a while to realize that would lead me to science. And then it took me a while to get a little further to geology. I started out sort of looking at chemistry, looking at biology, because that's what I had heard of. But the beautiful thing is I wandered into a class by a man named Stephen Jay Gould, who was a wonderful writer and communicator about science. And his class just opened up the realm of how I could take what I really loved, the exploration, the chemistry, the biology, and pull it all together to understand this planet, our home. And that spoke to me. And then I knew that I was where I wanted to be.
It's an interesting thought that we all have something that makes us very passionate. And the important thing, I was talking to some schools yesterday virtually, and when they say, what is your advice? And I say, well, I don't have a crystal ball, and I certainly don't know everything. So, but what I can tell you is that find your way. What makes you passionate, what it is that it doesn't matter if you put effort, because you're exactly where you need to be. And I said, we all have that. So the trick is to find it. I think you have.
Find it, and don't be afraid to follow a path to it. It's never a straight line. We go this way, we go that way. We make those mistakes. We make those experiments. And it's only at the end of that twisty journey that we know.
We are already at the end of our conversation, Barbara. It went so fast. I wanted to ask you what you're doing now. Maybe you can tell me in 3 seconds, and then we will have to have you again to talk about all these important questions.
Well, it's fun. We're really exploring this idea of how can life survive using different chemical reactions, different processes than we thought before. And we're finding that it may be true, not just on other planets, but also on this one. So again, it's really exciting because it's pushing the boundaries of what we think we know.
Thank you again for taking the time, Dr. Sherwood Lawler, to have this conversation with me. I have to mention that, again, Barbara is one of these persons that really bridges the worlds of science and art. She is married to an artist, a singer, a musician. Her children are musicians. And it's very fitting that next week we will be talking about music. Yeah. And the next Gigi conversation, we will host Lisette Canton, the director of the Ottawa Bach Choir, and Daniel Taylor, countertenor and professor of early music at the University of Toronto. There is a good chance you will hear beautiful music. Excellent. So join us next week for our Gigi conversation. Barbara, thank you so much. To all of you, please take care. Be safe.
Bye.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.